Hi everyone, this is Dr. Victoria Nalule, and in today's discussion, we want to ask a question: is the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, is that principle under threat in the 21st century? So what is permanent sovereignty over natural resources? That is a principle that recognizes the right of a state to utilize and gain from its natural resources. So there are various types of natural resources. There are energy resources, there are mining resources, even water, those are natural resources. But in today's discussion, I want to focus on the petroleum resources. So is the principle of permanent sovereignty over petroleum resources under threat in the 21st century, especially with the global move to transition to a low carbon economy and also the international attention given to tackling climate change. So, by background, we note that the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources dates as far back as the 1950s when Chile presented its resolution on permanent sovereignty over natural resources to the UN eighth session in 1953. And to date, that is a principle that has been recognized internationally, and it has also been recognized as a principle of international customary law. And then we saw in 1968, the OPEC resolution also emphasized or asserted the principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, specifically the petroleum resources. So if you've been following my videos, you would know that the petroleum sector has contributed greatly to the economic development of different countries, specifically the industrialized countries in the global north. Most of them, for the countries that have been beneficiary to petroleum resources, you can see that their economic development, economic prosperity is partly attributed to the development and utilization of those resources. But however, um, in the 21st century, we are faced with a global climate change challenge, which has been we have seen climate change impacts in different countries, in different regions, both in Europe, in Asia, in Africa. So it's a global threat. And as a result, one of the ways that have been suggested, this is just one of the ways that have been suggested to tackle the climate change challenge. One of the ways is to reduce reliance on fossil fuels. I'm sure you have been following the energy transition discussions and everything. But however, with the international instruments focused on tackling climate change, we're seeing a demand to stop funding for fossil fuels. We're seeing a demand to stop the exploration and development of fossil fuel resources. And the question is, in your opinion, do you think that the 21st century move to tackle climate change is a direct threat to the internationally recognized international principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, specifically the petroleum resources? So I would like to hear your views. What do you have to say about it? But in my opinion, I would give you my opinion, obviously. I think it's a threat, but this threat also depends on the countries concerned. Because for the countries that are likely to comply with these international instruments, the countries that are willing to have 100% uh, compliance with the international climate change instruments, then that is a major threat to them because they will have to leave their petroleum resources underground, their fossil fuel resources underground. And for the countries that are flexible, then the international instruments on climate change would not really pose a big risk to their permanent sovereignty over natural resources. I'll give the example. In 2022, we have obviously experienced an energy crisis, a global energy crisis, and it's partly attributed to the geopolitics, the war between Russia and Ukraine. But it's not only that, it's also attributed to the various laws, policies, and strategies that were formulated in the past as a way of tackling climate change. And these policies had a big impact on the investments in fossil fuels. So that's why we are seeing in 2022, many countries have been panicking. The countries that had stopped the development or even support for fossil fuels, they have gone back to utilizing the same. So you are saying that this principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, it's yes, it's under threat, but it also depends on the countries concerned. Because for the global north, we have seen that when they're under an energy security threat, they will automatically assert their permanent sovereignty over natural resources, and um, they will utilize their fossil fuels, including oil, because we have seen new licensing rounds being opened in the UK. Coal, we have seen coal power plants being reopened in Germany, natural gas. So when these countries are under an energy security threat, it means that they will automatically assert their permanent sovereignty over natural resources. But for countries, like for small countries that really tend to follow the international instruments that are being developed by different countries, for the countries that are willing to comply with these international instruments, it means that their sovereignty over natural resources is being threatened, because a few of them will stand up and say, you know what, we are facing an energy poverty challenge and we need to really assert our permanent sovereignty over natural resources to be able to tackle this challenge. And even if a country stands up, you have to ask yourself, where are the finances for the development of these fossil fuels? In most cases, the finances are coming from the global north. So this principle of permanent sovereignty over natural resources, it is under threat in the 21st century, because at the end of the day, even if a country has permanent sovereignty over natural resources, the strategies that are being formulated at an international level with respect to tackling climate change and reducing investments in fossil fuels, they are likely to have a direct impact in different countries, especially developing countries. So the question is, how can developing countries reaffirm or even strengthen their right to permanent sovereignty over natural resources? When should they accept for the international community to interfere in the development of their natural resources? Should it be a principle of, okay, obviously it's a principle of international law, but should we leave it at the international level for the decisions to be made? We have seen obviously people right now, they are attending the climate change conference, COP27 in Egypt, but is everyone being listened to? The issues of diversity and inclusion, because diversity doesn't only mean to have like Asian countries and African countries, or African representatives and Asian representatives there at COP27. What about their ideas? Is the international community willing to listen to these ideas? Are these ideas going to be incorporated in the reports that we're going to see after the COP27, or they're just going to be brushed off? So those are some of the issues we really need to talk about. Those are some of the issues you really have to focus on and ask yourself, in the 21st century, do countries really have their right to permanent sovereignty over natural resources, or this right is under threat and there's nothing they can do about it? So it's a short video, but I have obviously written about the topic in chapter 2 of my book on land law and extractive industries. So look out for that book. and obviously invite us to talk more about these issues. That's it for now. Bye bye and have a lovely day.